No water for 72 hours. The city doesn't make it 4:12 a.m. The taps cough once, then exhale air like a dying lung. A neighbor screams through the drywall, not words, just raw sound. Somewhere below, a fire alarm chirps one tired note, then shuts up forever. The entire building holds its breath, waiting for pressure that never returns. Street lights still burn, but the street feels darker than a blackout. The silence is wrong, like the city has lost its heartbeat. You hear elevators grinding to a stop, doors stuck between floors. You smell stale chlorine fading from hallways, replaced by sweat and metal and fear. You don't understand the catastrophe yet, and that's the point. Nobody does. Not at first, not in time. And while the city argues with itself about what's happening, your body starts a countdown. In that instant, the old world doesn't end loudly. It ends dry. The trigger isn't a bomb, and that makes it worse. At 3 water facilities, the industrial control network locks into a loop. Screens freeze, valves fail safe in the wrong direction. Pumps don't explode, they just stop obeying. The system isn't destroyed, it's confused into paralysis, and confusion is deadly at scale. Inside the operations center, engineers stare at red warnings they can't clear. They try manual override and get nothing. They call supervisors who call federal contacts who call military liaisons. Everybody speaks in acronyms to hide the fact that no one can promise you water by sunrise. Above ground, civilians are asleep because modern life sedates people. You wake up to dry sinks and assume it's building maintenance. You curse the landlord, you check the bathroom faucet, then the kitchen. You don't feel fear yet. You feel irritation, and irritation wastes time you can't afford. The first hour is denial, and denial burns your reserves faster than thirst. People flush toilets again and again, trying to fix it with repetition. They run showers just to see if it returns. They don't realize they're draining the last pressure from local lines like squeezing blood from a wound. By 6 a.m., the city's information system fractures into rumors. One person says it's a cyber attic. Another says a main has ruptured. Someone swears they saw soldiers at a bridge. The official alert arrives late and sterile, a calm message that reads like it was written for a different universe. The government's panic is quiet because panic is expensive. They don't say collapse. They say temporary disruption. They don't say ration. They say conservation measures. But the people hear the subtext anyway, and the subtext lands like a fist in the stomach. The first visible change is not dehydration, it's movement. Hallways fill with footsteps. Stairwells become arteries, pumping bodies down and up with buckets and bags. People who never spoke for years now interrogate each other in urgent whispers, trading scraps of information like it's currency. High-rises fail first, not because cities are weak, but because gravity is honest. Rooftop tanks carry hours, not days, and pumps require power and control systems. When control systems freeze, pressure becomes a memory. By mid-morning, upper floors go silent, like abandoned ships. On street level, the city still looks alive. Cars still move. Shops still open. But everything depends on water invisibly, and the invisible dependencies start snapping. Coffee machines stop. Dishwashers stop. Hand sinks in restaurants run dry. Bathrooms close, and when bathrooms close, public life becomes animal. A bodega owner tapes a sign to the door. Cash only. Nitrogen monoxide water, nitrogen monoxide restroom. He doesn't look cruel. He looks exhausted, already counting how many hours until his shelves become a riot. He keeps one case behind the counter like a pistol, a last resort he hopes not to use. The engagement question comes at you like a dare. Where do you go when the city stops feeding you? Your first instinct is escape, because distance feels like safety. They carry you into traffic that drinks your fuel. By noon, the grid starts behaving like a wounded organism. Cell towers overload as millions refresh news feeds. The network doesn't die. It degrades, and degradation breeds hallucinations. Videos circulate of empty reservoirs that aren't even in your country. Maps of working hydrants appear, and crowds chase them like ghosts. Gas stations become theaters of rage. The pumps work at first, then payment systems fail when banks throttle transactions to stop fraud. People wave cards like prayers and get declined. The station owner locks the door. A line of cars becomes a line of trapped decisions, each one burning fuel in place. ATMs go first in dense areas, not because there's less money, but because there are more hands. Cash becomes a survival tool, not for luxury, but for access. A man offers $20 for a gallon of tap water from a restaurant kitchen. The manager doesn't answer. He just stares, calculating risk. By hour 12, the city's smell changes. Garbage sits longer because cleaning crews can't sanitize. Bathrooms back up. People stop washing hands. The subway still runs, but stations reek of panic sweat and stale urine, because water was the thin line between crowds and filth. Hospitals turn into islands of functioning reality. They have backup tanks, emergency deliveries, protocols written for hurricanes and earthquakes. But this is not a storm that passes. This is a system that may not restart on schedule. Every hospital administrator knows the math and refuses to say it out loud. The first real fights happen in places that once felt boring. A grocery aisle becomes a battlefield because it holds bottled water pallets. A man grabs a pack, another grabs his wrist, and the struggle spreads outward like electricity. Nobody wants to be the first monster, but everyone fears being the first victim. Police arrive late because police are also human and also thirsty. They try to separate people, but separation doesn't create water. A baton swing creates a bruise, not a solution. The crowd learns the lesson fast. Authority is strong in normal times and thin in scarcity. At 18 hours, the hoarding cascade begins. Bathtubs fill. Trash cans fill. Storage bins fill. People treat water like it's gold, but they store it like it's infinite. They don't disinfect containers. They don't cover them. They create private puddles that will breed illness long before they save lives. In apartments, neighbors become either allies or predators, and the difference is one conversation. A woman on the 7th floor has a camping filter. Her neighbor has a full bathtub. Another has a first aid kit. They form a micro-market, trading resources in whispers, because the city is now built on barter. Outside, the suburbs don't look better. They look slower to react. Houses have space, but space without redundancy is fragile. A suburban water tower holds millions of gallons, and people think that means days. Then the community panics and drains it in hours because fear multiplies consumption faster than any pump can refill. Everywhere, the biggest killer is not thirst yet. It's bad choices made while your brain is still sharp. People waste energy walking long distances in heat. They drink too much on day one and rationalize it as staying hydrated. They ignore the fact that tomorrow is not promised. At 24 hours, cognitive decline begins quietly. Headaches, irritability, fog. The body protects the core by sacrificing the mind, and when the mind weakens, decisions turn reckless. People start believing the loudest voice in the room because evaluating truth requires water you no longer have. Emergency alerts announce distribution sites, and the city lunges toward them like a starving animal. Lines stretch around blocks. Some people bring strollers filled with containers. Others bring suitcases. A few bring weapons hidden under coats. Nobody says weapon, but everyone senses the potential. The distribution point runs like triage, not charity. A volunteer scans faces and looks for the elderly, the disabled, the families with infants. Able-bodied adults get told to wait. Waiting becomes its own form of torture because standing in line burns fluid, and fluid is what you are trying to acquire. At 36 hours, the city's hygiene breaks. Without running water, small cuts fester. Contact lenses become a risk. Toilets become liabilities. People begin to understand that dehydration is only one threat. Infection, heat stress, and violence stack like weights on a sinking platform. The streets get louder, not with sirens, but with arguments. You hear couples fighting over whether to leave. You hear parents bargaining with children who don't understand why baths are forbidden. You hear strangers accusing strangers of taking too much because morality becomes a rationed resource. The infrastructure fails in an order that feels personal but isn't. Priority flows to critical nodes, hospitals, emergency command posts, key government buildings. The rest gets what's left. The city learns the brutal hierarchy of survival systems, and the hierarchy does not care about fairness. By hour 48, the invisible architecture becomes visible. You see where redundancy exists and where it never did. Dense neighborhoods have more clinics, more shelters, more information exchanges. Sprawled areas have fewer options and longer travel distances. The land that once felt like freedom becomes a maze without supplies. Geopolitics enters the story through silence. Leaders appear on screens and promise restoration, but their eyes betray uncertainty. Behind the scenes, agencies argue about whether this is war or disaster. If it's war, the response becomes military. If it's disaster, the response becomes bureaucratic. Either way, you're still thirsty. International networks watch the crisis like a rehearsal. Allies offer technical teams. Rivals probe for weakness. News channels speculate about hostile states and criminal syndicates. Nobody can prove anything fast enough, and that delay poisons trust. Trust collapses, and when trust collapses, crowds become weapons. Shortwave radios return like ghosts from another century. People who mocked preppers now beg for frequencies and batteries. Someone on a rooftop shouts that the river is fine, and others believe it, even though rivers inside cities often carry invisible toxins. The lack of information becomes poison, disguised as clarity. At 60 hours, you start seeing bodies sitting down and not getting up quickly. Not dead, not yet, but slowed by biology. Lips crack, eyes dull. People stop talking to conserve energy. The city is still loud in pockets, but the overall tone shifts to heavy and exhausted. Roads become parking lots of despair. Families try to evacuate and get trapped in heat with no bathrooms and no water. Engines idle, then die. Tempers ignite. Someone tries to siphon gas and gets beaten. A child cries until the crying becomes a thin, hoarse rasp. Emergency shelters fill school gyms with hanging sheets and exhausted faces. Water is rationed at survival levels, measured and cold. It's enough to prevent death today, not enough to maintain dignity. The shelter is not comfort. It is biological maintenance under fluorescent lights. In the city core, repair crews restore limited service to strategic blocks. Water returns to a financial district first, because money and governance demand it. People cheer at running sinks like it's a miracle, but the miracle doesn't reach everyone. The recovered zones look like islands surrounded by dry neighborhoods. The new normal is a map of winners and losers drawn by infrastructure logic. Those with money leave early and don't come back. Those without money remain and endure. The city becomes the same geography with a different population, like a mask that no longer fits the face beneath it. Mutual aid groups emerge not from ideology but from necessity. People form water brigades, carrying containers in organized runs. They post watchers at stairwells. They create rules and enforce them. This is society rebuilding itself with duct tape and fear, and it works until it doesn't. Violence doesn't explode everywhere. It concentrates where scarcity meets pride. A man guarding a lobby stash becomes a tyrant by accident. A woman hoarding bathtub water becomes a target. People learn that the most dangerous resource is not water itself, but the perception of water. In the geopolitical response rooms, the conversation becomes cold. Analysts calculate how many days a metropolis can survive on trucking alone. They model riots as weather patterns. They discuss whether to deploy troops under emergency authority. Every decision carries the shadow of escalation, because soldiers on streets change the meaning of citizenship. By 72 hours, the mathematics become absolute. Without adequate intake, the body forces shut down. The city can still function in fragments, but human cognition degrades across millions at the same time. That is the real catastrophe. A population losing decision-making capacity in unison. Some people survive the third day and think the danger has passed. They are wrong. Day 4 is where secondary collapse arrives. Disease spreads faster when people can't wash. Fire risk rises when people cook with improvised methods. Crime becomes organized when desperation becomes routine. The crisis doesn't end with water returning to a few neighborhoods. It ends when supply chains restart, when trust restitches, when sanitation comes back, when people believe tomorrow is real again. And that doesn't happen quickly. Not in a city that just learned how thin its safety really was. In the aftermath, the lesson isn't heroic. It's humiliating. Modern life is a temporary agreement between systems and people. When the system fails, the agreement dissolves, and what remains is biology and behavior. The city doesn't die in one dramatic moment. It erodes decision by decision. You don't remember the exact hour the taps return. You remember the first time you see someone wash their hands and cry. You remember the way strangers shared a cup and looked ashamed at how grateful they felt. You remember how quickly comfort became a myth you once believed without proof. The lingering truth is simple and cruel. Water is not just a resource. It is time, sanitation, cognition, order. When it vanishes, the city isn't fighting for hydration. It's fighting for the ability to stay human. And the final equation doesn't care what you meant to do. When the water stops, you learn what the city really is. Not steel, not glass, not power. It's pressure in pipes and trust between strangers. Take away either one long enough, and the rest becomes a hollow shell. The taps come back eventually, but the innocence never does.